March is a vivid first-hand account of John Lewis's lifelong struggle for civil and human rights, meditating in the modern age on the distance traveled since the days of Jim Crow and segregation. Rooted in Lewis's personal story, it also reflects on the highs and lows of the broader civil rights movement. And that is because your book club on March Book 1 is now in session. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson.
And I'm Jason. I like to walk across bridges. Inman, welcome to your Mind University. This is the podcast where we take a book, a character, a construct, and tell you everything you need to know about it in a little bit less than an hour. And this week, it's a very special episode. It's a very special episode because not only are we going to be talking about what I think is probably one of the greatest Americans of all time, but we are going to be talking about the book that greatest American of all time wrote, which is even doubler in specialness. Greatness. Me know English real well.
I will say this right now. This is maybe the best book we've read for a book club so far.
Don't give it away already. We're
10 Bragos out of 5.
We're like a minute into this podcast.
46 seconds.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. 17 out of 5 stars. But no, today we are talking about March Book 1, which again is a great comic book that was published by Top Shelf Productions in the way back in days. Of like 2012. But we're talking about this because a great man, Representative John Lewis, recently passed away. And really cool thing about John Lewis, this congressman, not only was he a big member of the civil rights movement and personally knew Dr. Martin Luther King.
Youngest person to speak at the March on Washington.
The youngest person to speak at the historical event. He's also represented the United States government. He's also a super nerd.
Yeah.
He loved comic books.
He loved school, as we learned in this book.
He loved school and he loved comic books. So, this is like the Venn diagram of the perfect person to talk about a Geek History Lesson. And that's why we're diving into March Book 1. So, of course, we're going full spoilers if you have not read this book. But I would highly recommend this book over, I think, every other book we've ever read on this podcast.
And we've read some books that we've really liked on the show.
Yeah. But I will say this, speaking of nerds and speaking of comic books, you may or you may not know this, but Ashley and I have our next comic book coming out in October. The original graphic novel, Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio. It is the sequel to our Ringo-nominated all-ages adventure comic, Jupiter Jet Volume 1. And it is the second adventure in Jupiter Jet's life. Jupiter Jet is now 17. She still has that jetpack, and she's yearning to soar across the solar system. But when the mysterious black flyer, this other person with a jetpack, shows up to her world, what will Jupiter Jet do? Well, I'll give you some brief spoilers here. Jupiter Jet's going to get her butt kicked a couple of times. But I have a feeling she'll persevere through it. But you can pre-order at your local comic book shop right now. You can pre-order on Amazon.
You can pre-order it directly from us at jupiterjetcomic.com.
Yes, you can pre-order it there for a bit more. And it is one of those things where pre-orders do matter, especially in the comic book market. So even if you've already purchased a copy, please tell your friends. It is in this month's issue of previews. So you can find it there. You go talk to your local comic book shop, tell them to order Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio. If they're not going to order it, tell them to order it. Even if you own a copy, it really makes a difference. So Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio, it hits comic book stores on October 7th. Go check it out. We'd appreciate it if you do. And we think if you like Kim Possible, you like Men in Black, you like The Rocketeer, this is going to be the perfect comic book for you. It is perfect for all members of your families. Grandpa would love it. Also, little Timmy, 3-year-old little Timmy's going to love it too.
Yeah, for sure.
It's for everybody in your family, and we're really proud of it, and we think you enjoy it. Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio hit stores October 7th.
Hey.
Now, let's go to a comic book that's already been published. March, Book 1.
I do want to say really quickly that we are doing this episode because we put out a poll on our Twitter at GHL Podcasts asking after Representative John Lewis passed, if we should finally dive into this book on your behalf and chat about it. And 90.8% of you said yes. Shame on the 9.2% of you who said no.
Well, I have something for the people that did.
Okay. Yeah. So everybody who said yes, please consider yourself a TA of this episode. Twitter doesn't give us the analytics on who clicked on that, but thank you for doing so.
All right. So are we ready to move into the first section of the podcast, Ashley, the 10-cent origin?
Yes, we are going to move into the 10-cent origin. What is that, Jason?
The 10-cent origin is the first section of our podcast where Ashley is going to give you all the major beats, the whatsits, the who'sits of March Book 1, so that if you ever go to an amazing cocktail party that is in Washington, D.C., full of all the hobnob rich people, you can be like, hey, have you ever read this comic book that's about one of you guys?
They wish. So the creators of March Book 1, the writers are John Lewis and Andrew Aiden. The artist and letterer is Nate Powell. It is 121 pages published by Top Shelf Production. By the way, especially for our newer comic book people, if you see Top Shelf Productions on a book, it's probably pretty good. It was originally published on August 13th, 2013, and proceeded to win pretty much every single award that it could that year, and then in subsequent years for subsequent volumes. The March trilogy is an autobiographical black and white graphic novel trilogy about the civil rights movement told through the perspective of civil rights leader and U.S. Congressman John Lewis. May he rest in power. He did pass away this year on July 17th, and I am very much of the opinion that when someone passes, our mourning should be a celebration of their light, and this is definitely a huge contribution that John Lewis made, not only to history, but to popular culture. In fact, and I will share this picture, in 2013, he went to San Diego Comic-Con cosplaying as himself in this book.
From March.
And there's a picture of him marching over that little bridge with a bunch of kids.
Yep.
It's amazing.
It is. You want to talk about just genius marketing, but we also we also want to talk about here, because we would be, any of us, even if you're not American, would be lucky to live a life like John Lewis. Like, you want to talk about, like, there's always that when somebody passes, you're like, oh, well, I hope their life was well lived. And I just look at John Lewis's life and I already feel inadequate. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get there.
He was, I believe, 25 when they marched from Selma. So, when I was 25, which was only about 5 minutes ago, I'm very young.
Yes.
I was very concerned about how many comic books I had to read. So, and it's not a competition, but that is something, and I think we'll get into that in the discussion, that you really, this book really puts into perspective. Yeah,
I want to just really point out that John Lewis, of course, we keep saying U.S. representative, and I want to say, just in case there are some international listeners that do not know what that is, basically in the United States, the representatives, there's the House of Representatives, and there's the Senate. So you're either a senator or the House of Representatives. They are part of what is known as Congress. And John Lewis was a U.S. representative from Georgia's 5th congressional district. Now, if you don't know what that means, that's because in the United States, we divide up the House of Representatives based on population. So if a state has more population,
like California,
they have more representatives. So, Georgia has
a decent population.
I actually don't know how many representatives Georgia has, because I've never lived there, but at least has 5. So John Lewis was I think he was representative until he died.
Yeah, for sure.
He died in office, which is amazing.
He did, and this is something that I was going to say for recommended reading, but he had an article that he had written to be published posthumously that I really encourage people to go.
It's in the New York Times.
To go check out. I will link to it. I'll put it on our recommended reading page, but he talks about the days leading up to his passing, and it's very interesting. It's very sad.
All right, Ashley, let's get into talking about the. Do we want to? Is there even a point to doing a meet cute for this?
Well, I was going to ask you because I know that you and I first read March for this book club because it does tackle a lot of really difficult subject matter, and media that does, you keep kind of pushing off. We've owned these books for a long time.
We have owned these books for a long time. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, do you remember when you first heard about March?
Oh no, I really don't.
So I remember because I had not heard about it until the Eisners for like the 2013 year. So that would have been the 2014 Eisners because the March won everything.
Yeah.
And I am not American. I don't know a super amount about American history, but I knew that a congressman had written this comic. And then that was how I first learned not only about March, but about John Lewis. Did you know who John Lewis was before March?
I did. I did know who John Lewis was, because John Lewis there are certain representatives and there's certain senators that become famous sort of just for what they do.
Yeah, exactly.
They become, like kind of like Bernie Sanders. Like he became, he's a famous senator. I knew who John Lewis was before this comic book. And then when I heard about this comic book, he became even more famous to me.
Cool.
So, no, he was kind of always, and maybe I have a different perspective than most Americans, but for me, he was always the congressman that was like, oh, that's the congressman that walked with Martin Luther King. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how I knew him. I was like, oh, that's who that is.
He kind of looked the same too for most of his life. Like he didn't change a lot when he got older. He just got less hair.
Yeah, he just got rid of his hair.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move into our discussion in place of our regular History 101, I do want to tell all of our listeners about AVEC and Peel Men Medical Relief. You can find that by going to AAMMR. This is a not-for-profit medical relief team that supports Central Haiti. It means with many hands. And they were founded in 2014 and have been able to respond to numerous natural and medical disasters, such as a post-hurricane relief and cholera outbreaks. They are currently partnered with a central clinic and multiple orphanages in Haiti. Their team is made up of medical professionals that combined have almost 50 years experience in disaster and international medical relief. They also have a unique model of hosting Haitian physicians in the U.S. to train them and teach techniques that they can take home and use in their practices, empowering and helping to improve the quality of healthcare in Haiti. They are always looking for funding, supplies, and support for the clinic and everything that it's getting up to. They are working especially hard right now during the global pandemic to keep Haiti as healthy as possible. And you can learn more and support them by going to aammr.org. I want to thank listener and supporter Ryan Venus for bringing this to our attention, for partnering with AAMMR. Haiti is a really important and interesting part of American history. Mm-hmm. And so I think that this is a wonderful opportunity. Go check them out. Jason and I are very thoughtful about the types of medical products that we want to feature on this podcast. And I think that AAMMR and the medical relief that they're working on is really important. So go check them out, aammr.org. Support them now during the pandemic. Support them always. And let's keep everyone as safe and healthy as possible.
And thanks to them for sponsoring the podcast.
Yes, thank you. All right.
So now we ready to go into the History 101?
Now we are. Let's talk about March.
All right. So again, there will be full spoilers for March Book 1, but I also will say that the spoilers of March Book 1 are anything you could probably find out in history.
Yes. Or, but also if you listen to President Barack Obama's eulogy of John Lewis, you pretty much get a recap of Volume 1.
Well, okay, let's talk about this. And this book opens with the famous walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Martin Luther King, whole group of people, they're walking across the bridge, and the cops do not want them to cross. They're saying it's an unlawful assembly. And, I don't know how many things John Lewis wrote before he wrote this comic book. And I know Nate Powell and Andrew Aiden, I think that's how you say it, also helped him throughout this book. But it's a good start because they always say start with a strong teaser. And watching the main character of your book, young John Lewis, be beaten in the opening scene, it does make you wonder how he survived it immediately before it goes to the giant title card of this book of March.
Yes, and something that'll probably be dealt with in the second book, if people didn't know, John Lewis was very badly injured during that march. His head was pretty seriously injured, as were many people there. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you're not going to get a ton of action scenes in your traditional comic book sense.
No.
But starting...
Especially in a biography. An
auto bio, yeah. But starting with that is very powerful. Can we talk about the framing device?
Yes. So this book is basically framed around John Lewis being in Washington, D.C. in January 20th of 2009. Now, if that date's not important to you, it should be, because that is the date that the United States of America inaugurated,
President Handsome,
the first black American as president, President Barack Obama. And, at first I was like, well, I don't know about that. But then when you think about that in terms of the context of modern times, I would imagine for most black Americans, that was an insanely important day. And I would also imagine for somebody like John Lewis, who was fighting for this dream of equality before Barack Obama was even born. To see this happen was probably astounding to him. I'm reminded of something that, and this is really kind of personal for me, but, let's put it out there.
Sure.
When I spent my year, I was in the Army, and I spent my year in Iraq, for 2005, it kind of became a dream that we ever leave. We would talk about it. We constantly talked about going home. But because it was we were told that it could be up to 18 months. We didn't know it was going to be here. We were like, oh, you could be here for 18 months. So we had no idea, but it was constantly in everybody's mind. And then when we finally got the word that like, oh no, you're going to go home in December. So you've only been here for a year.
Only a year.
It almost didn't seem real. It seemed like it was fake, and it also seemed like, oh my God, like this is so absurd. Like, and when I came home, I still had that feeling for like a couple months later, being like, I can't believe this. This has to be a dream. Like this isn't real. Because you get so used to your reality. And I think this is a brilliant framing device because, like, I imagine for somebody like John Lewis who fought for this his entire life, that he probably had that same feeling seeing Barack Obama inaugurated.
My favorite part of the framing device is that the little kids, just like any little kid, don't appreciate the magnitude of what they're experiencing by happening to find John Lewis in his office at that time, at that day.
Which, by the way, that is something you can actually do. You can go to a senator's or a representative's office and see if they'll...
And they might be there,
Well, and they might be there,
And then through the story, we get pretty much... John's entire story up until his early 20s. And there's a lot of focus in the beginning about his time with chickens, which I found very interesting. And obviously that's true to his life. And a lot of people have spoken about it. And he's told lots of stories and interviews about it. But we recently watched Roots for the first time.
I was going to bring that up too. And I didn't watch it for the first time.
Okay, I saw it for the first time. Jason rewatched it. You're correct. We watched the original series. And Chicken George, played by Ben Vereen, is a very prominent figure towards the end of that. And I know it's just a coincidence, but just having experienced these two seminal pieces of Black art that both had this focus on raising chickens, I was like, oh, that's cute.
I felt as a farm boy myself.
I was going to ask you.
And we did have chickens, although my grandparents had more chickens than my parents did. I think my dad finally eventually got frustrated with the chickens and we got rid of them, or they were all killed by the coyotes.
Oh no.
But I felt a lot of sympathy with young John Lewis here during this scene as him, a young boy with the chickens. And to be honest with you, I really love the moment where he would like preach to them.
I love that. To me, I could imagine it so clearly. It's such a precious thing.
And I love that all the chickens are like, whoop, 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 whoop.
And he's like, but they never quite said amen.
Yeah, I think that's a great little moment. And I also think that's a strong piece of writing because like
ministry is very important and faith is a very important theme.
Well, I was going to say like the fact of the matter of him raising these little chickens just really grounds this character, because you have to sort of look at the problem with writing an autobiography, right? Is how do you distance the real person from the story character? Because you have to do it. Like,
of course.
Your story character can never actually really be you. You know, you sort of have to twist and make things to make it a story.
It's fiction. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because real lives don't follow the beats of storytelling.
What?
Yeah, no, not at all. Real life's kind of boring.
Yeah, especially right now.
But this is an interesting way to like immediately take you back and just give you this sweet little story of this little boy and chickens and immediately make you empathize with him.
I think it sets up literally everything that we're going to see for the rest of the volume, because we get his story about the preacher, about preaching, and about getting the Bible and how all of that resonated with him. You get a real look at his empathy and the way that he relates to other living things, because he loves these chickens. He doesn't want to eat them when they are served. He is upset by it. He takes his duty very seriously. He's a very serious child who later goes on to have a life in politics, obviously very serious, tackling very serious issues. And then in a later installment of that storyline, when he is taken to the north by his Uncle
Otis,
for the first time, and we get a little nod to the Green Book and traveling through the South on that road trip. The way he experiences chicken and eating chicken in the North is also a way that he understands the class difference and the caste difference between Northern and Southern Black people. Like, it's really interesting how much is set up just by him being like, I had chickens and I loved them and I read scripture to them.
Well, I also have to say that it's an interesting perspective, and I'm curious, and any of our international listeners, I would love to hear this as well. Because I don't know how much this resonates internationally, but in America, if you are a person of kind of like John Lewis's age, where you were sort of born in the 1920s or the 1930s, you sort of saw America go from, because America in the 1940s
there were still cowboys.
Yeah, there
in Texas and stuff.
There were still cowboys robbing trains.
Yeah.
Read
All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy for more on that.
Yeah, there were houses that were very if you were out in the more agricultural areas, you basically were still living in the 19th century.
I was going to say, didn't your grandparents, weren't they the first generation to have electricity? My
grandfather was.
Yeah.
I don't remember when they got it. My grandfather was born in 1926. He's no longer with us, but I remember him telling me the story once he was like, I remember when we first got electricity.
Yeah.
And I want to say it happened when he was a teenager. So then that means it didn't happen until the early 1940s.
Yeah.
Around the time of Little George and his chickens. But yes,
John.
Excuse me. Yes, Little John and his chickens.
Who they call Bob because he must have gone by his middle name, which is Robert.
I thought that was interesting too. I thought that was a nice little character. But I loved the sequence of Uncle Otis taking him north. And again, I like the idea that he saw, yes, these urban areas in the 1930s, 1940s that would have seemed like sci-fi futuristic cities to him.
Yeah. And he talks about when he's in the city buying candy and the way Nate Powell draws it. And I'm assuming he drew it because this was what was written on the panel. Nate Powell, by the way, crushes the art.
Oh, we should talk about that. Nate Powell's art, especially his use of shading. Because
grayscale comics are hard.
The way he decides how to light each scene is genius. The use of blacks is astounding in this.
But the scene where young John Lewis buys candy from a white vendor in the city, and he was like, I loved it, and I made that bag of candy last as long as I could, and the man is smiling at him, and he's kind, which is not to say that everybody in the North was super woke and accepting or anything like that, but the way that opens up a whole new world to him, which will later translate to him sneaking back to school, which is something that I, as a child, could not have imagined.
I want to talk about this. I love the sequence. So eventually becomes that his family is farmers and basically
they're sharecroppers.
They're sharecroppers, and so they have to.
Should we explain what sharecropping is?
I don't know if I would do it justice. To be honest,
Google it.
I would.
It's indentured servitude as a farmer, but Google it for the more complexities, or watch Mudbound.
Well, okay, so here's the actual definition of sharecropping. Sharecropping is when a landowner allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on the land. So, but basically what it would be is that, so obviously John's father basically rented this land from somebody else, and he had to give up, usually it was about 25%, about a quarter of the crops to that person. But what happened in the South is that a lot of white people would use sharecropping as a way to basically make African Americans indentured servants.
Because they would charge you for rent on top of it. They would charge you for supplies on top of it.
They would charge you for the use of your farm equipment and all stuff like that. Yeah. So
I just know that I wasn't aware of what sharecropping was until I met you. So there was a good chance that some of our listeners might not be as familiar with sharecropping.
So his family and his dad, so their family is all like, we got to make that quota. So they're like, everybody's got to get out in the fields, which again, for the 1940s, very real.
Yeah, for sure.
I love the sequence where he hides underneath the house and he sprints like the Flash to get to the bus so that he can go to school. But I think this is such an amazing moment, and this might be my favorite moment of this book, because this choice that John Lewis made to run onto this bus and to go to school changed his entire life. It ensured that he was not going to be his dad.
Yeah.
And that led him to become the great man. Because he could have gone.
He's iconic.
Yeah, he could have gone into the field with his dad, and to be honest with you,
which is a perfectly respectable thing to have done.
Yes, but we would have no idea who he was. Like now, like
Absolutely.
he would not be famous in the way he is.
I also like when he speaks about being punished for sneaking off to school by his father, that he said he was never beaten for this. He was lectured for it, and we're not going to pass judgment on the way parenting was in the 30s and 40s because it was a very different time. But I like the fact that his parents, even though they were like, we wish you wouldn't do this, that they can already see the value and the spark in him continuing his education. Because I think for most of us, people who are around the same age as Jason and I, or younger, or maybe in school now, like, all I ever wanted to do was not go to school. I can't imagine being so desperate to go to school, you know?
Yeah, I wouldn't have been like John Lewis.
No. I'd have been like, oh, I could stay home? Great. You want me to do a couple chores? I'm not saying that farm work is easy by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's not.
Great.
No, it's not.
And that really stuck with me. That and then a scene that we'll get to later on when they're in the nonviolence workshops, like you said, I think are probably the strongest.
Oh, yeah. So what else do you want to talk about, Ashley?
I would also like to talk about when John is considering what his post-high school career is going to look like, because his mom encourages him to get a job at a it's not a seminary, but it's like a Christian school so that he can get tuition there. But John wants to go to the biggest university there. And so after hearing Martin Luther King preach on the radio, he sends him a letter and a series of letters, because that's what you did. You couldn't just Google someone. And then they basically say, oh, you're the boy from Troy, or the kid from Troy, which becomes his moniker for...
Yeah, we should back up before that, because I feel we're missing a pretty big thing, and that's the idea that when the segregation in schools is outlawed.
Oh, sure. I just want to get to those nonviolence workshops.
Which is when he's still in high school, but we should talk about that because that's an important event in his life. And just in case anybody doesn't know, Brown v. Board is that case. It happened in 1951 when the public school district in Topeka, Kansas.
I saw that.
Yep. Refused to enroll the daughter of a local black resident, Oliver Brown, at the school closest to their home, instead requiring her to ride a bus to a segregated black elementary school farther away. Yeah, my home state, it's pretty bad sometimes.
I mean, it's not a defensible decision that they made, but ultimately it led to huge change, and no state is free of huge mistakes.
Yes, and so that led to Rosa Parks, and it led to basically the launch of the civil rights movement. But yes, I do love this beat that he would write letters to Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King eventually brought him in, and then the idea. And you know, it's interesting because there's a beat in this book. You can tell that John Lewis really respects and admires Martin Luther King in this book, but he also presents him as a real person. We have a tendency in history to deify characters, and Martin Luther King is somebody that we could do that. But
you could do worse than to deify someone like Martin Luther King.
Well, here's the thing: Martin Luther King in this book is presented as, well, we're going to get you into Troy State, John, but we're going to have to sue the state of Alabama, and we're going to need you to hop on board, and we're going to need you to do this case that's basically going to ruin your life, because it'll get us what we want.
And you need your parents' permission, by the way, because you are underage. You are a child.
Yes, but again, that is what a civil rights leader that wants to push their agenda would do. Not a deity. So I appreciate that Dr. Martin Luther King here is presented as a real person. I really appreciate that.
But I also appreciate that he doesn't sugarcoat what this request would take, because he worked so closely with Thurgood Marshall, and this is coming out of a lot of those big cases that were starting to happen, particularly in the South, where the only way to get any kind of traction, and we'll actually see a trial later where nothing effective happens, was to literally make a big enough stink to sue a state over, or to sue an entire institution over. And John Lewis's parents understandably, will not co-sign on this.
Yeah.
And even though in the narrative, the character John Lewis is upset, as I'm sure the real man was, the narrator lets us know that this actually pushes him down the path to becoming who he is, ultimately.
And it leads him to this class in March 26, 1958, to Jim Lawson, who is conducting a workshop, on nonviolence at a church. And John goes there, and the church is not well attended, but he gets sucked into it, and he realizes the idea that Jim Lawson is pushing the words of Gandhi in Indian nonviolence and talking about the evils of racism, poverty, and war. And it leads me to my favorite page of the book, where it is a profile black and white picture of John Lewis. And,
I'll share it on the socials.
Of John Lewis. And he says, his words liberated me. I thought, this is it. This is the way out. And that is the kind of turning point where John, because of John going forward from this book, he is the one that gathers his classmates. He is the one that gathers his friends, and he all takes them to Jim Lewis. And now we can talk to the thing about you've wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
This is one of the most powerful scenes in this entire book. Them practicing the insults on each other to get used to them.
So something that, and a lot of our reading of this is admittedly like mired in white people guilt, because we're white people, and that is the perspective.
Yeah, very much
we
so.
have to approach this. But the white guilt in me was so gratified to see that there was like a white person there with them.
There's a couple.
And that when they later go to like the lunch counters and stuff, that they do have white allies. That made me feel really good. And it was interesting to see them cycle through these basically improv scenarios where everyone has to play every role. Everyone has to play the victim. Everyone has to play the aggressor. Everybody has to play the police officer.
Yes, actually, I want to, I don't mean, am I interrupting?
No, please.
I want to ask you a question right here, right now, because, and I'm going to ask you this question because I know you, and I've podcasted like 320 some episodes
Almost
with
350.
you. How do you think you would react in this class? Now, obviously, you have to change the tone, right? Because obviously, you are not going to be giving the same racial slurs that John Lewis was.
Right.
But like, people could find humanity's terrible. So you could find some insults that would really upset you as a Canadian woman.
Yeah.
How do you think you'd do in this class?
I think under this scenario, like if I am there as someone who is ideally acting as an ally to a black person,
yes.
I would be crying the entire time. You know me.
Yeah, but I'm saying like
it would be hard. However,
if the slurs were towards you.
Oh, if the slurs were toward me?
Yes.
So
imagine the worst thing that somebody could ever say to you, and they're just shouting at you.
I mean, I'm going to be completely honest here. As a woman,
Yeah.
I've heard it.
Okay.
Yeah, men say horrible things to you when you don't talk to them, as it turns out. It's interesting because I'm a person who
and I'm sorry that is a reality of the world.
It is, and I am by no means comparing what I experienced to what these characters experience. This is the analogy that we're making for the sake of the podcast.
I'm making an analogy because like I think because
it would be
John
hard.
Lewis and these people maintain their composure.
Yes, I'm not a composed person.
Well,
I would be probably one of the people who'd be like, I have to leave. Because I very much need to like collect myself and then come back to a situation.
I'm going to be honest. Like I think I could handle it for like maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then at 15 minutes, I think I'm clocking somebody.
It's tough because.
But they did it for hours and hours and hours. They suffered through this. But. And like I just have such mad respect for these characters.
They made the right decision because there is a bit of rhetoric, right, about being particularly black, particularly a black man, right, that you have to be better than everyone else to be taken seriously. And a big part of why this chunk of the civil rights movement was effective was because they were polite, they were well-dressed, they were articulate, and they were nonviolent. Now, I don't want to unpack the sort of Malcolm X side of it, the Magneto side of it, where, yes, you can get results using violence, but that's not what we're talking about in this book. But ultimately, like, they found that this was effective for them because it's like Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high.
Yeah. I will say, like, when we get to the sequence of them doing all the lunch counter sit-ins, so basically in the American South, it was this idea that there were sections for Black Americans and they could not sit at the lunch counter. Now,
The idea of a lunch counter is wild to me, that you'd want to go to a department store and then have a sandwich. Like, what?
Well, lunch counter and like a diner as well.
Yes, I understand.
They exist. I mean, I just want to point out right now that I don't know why people in the South thought the lunch counter were like the best seats in a diner. It's the booth, you idiots.
I know, they're the worst.
It's the booth.
We sit at the lunch counter when there's nowhere else to sit.
Yeah, like everybody wants the corner booth.
Yeah, leave me alone.
I could give a damn about the lunch counter. So like, I don't get why they were like, the lunch counter is the best seat.
I think I suppose maybe because they were allowed to sit in the booths.
Fair.
The lunch counter is, in terms of the structure of a diner,
the most visible.
It's the most visible, right? And you're facing the mirror, and people can see you through the windows.
Well, so anyways, my point is, I was going to say is that I have seen the civil rights movement in several television shows, several movies, several books, and I want to give some mad kudos here to the team of March, because seeing several of these situations with John Lewis and the lunch counters kind of elaborated what they were trying to do more than anything else. Because like, I don't know if I ever understood, like I understood like, okay, we're going to sit here because it's the place we cannot sit.
Yeah.
And we're going to show you. But March does this really good job of this in this comic book of showing us that no. The idea was that we need to make these businesses basically dead stop so that they have no choice but to serve us.
Well, it's a capitalist society.
Exactly.
So.
And when you think about it, and to be honest with you, in all these past movies and other movies I've seen about this, I don't think that point has ever been
driven home
to me until this book.
Cool.
Yeah. You can continue. Sorry, I apologize to listeners. I backed up and I was like, I really have to scratch my forehead. And then I actually thought I was going to continue speaking.
I did. Sorry.
I needed to itch my head, Ashley. I've been sitting at too many lunch counters.
It's true.
The grease is getting on me.
from the burgers or
the burger,
the egg
again,
creams.
They're the worst seats in the diner. I don't know why. What you Southerners? Okay, all of our Southern listeners. If you have any theories about this, why is the lunch counter the best seat in your diners? I do not understand this.
Yeah, you're wild. I'm sorry. It's just so funny. And it is interesting to me how the book sort of progresses from doing the polite sit-ins to how they kind of trick the mayor into agreeing to desegregate the lunch counters and how that leads them to larger and larger action. Like, nobody went into this thinking, oh, we're going to be famous, right? Which is such the opposite of how a lot of people approach things in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
And to see that you can approach something with such purity, I found really uplifting.
I will say the other thing I think is really good is so we go through the sequence of all the sit-ins and we get to the point in February 27th, 1960, where he is carted out of the Woolworths.
Yes.
And in the book, he's arrested for the very first time.
First of many times, I think he says.
And I love the art direction we see in several panels the people as they're being led into I don't know if there is paddy wagons. I don't know a better term.
I don't really know if that's what we're supposed to call them anymore.
Oh, really? Is that a thing? I apologize if that's an incorrect. I don't know.
That, to be fair, that is what they call it in the book.
Yes.
But the police cars.
It is a police van. Paddy wagon is actually an Irish term, Ashley.
Yes, yeah, because Irish are paddies like St. Patrick's.
I apologize if that is an offensive term at all. I did not mean that. It's the only thing I've known.
Yeah.
These police vans. So, anyways, I love the art where we see them all singing "We Shall Overcome Someday" through several panels, and
which quote unquote modern day John Lewis is singing when we see him getting ready at the beginning of the book.
Yeah. And then I love the idea is that once they're all shut into these police vans, we get this shot and this amazing artwork by Nate Powell where it's like solid black. We see a little bit of John Lewis's face, and then on like his profile we get some highlights, and it's a very stunning and like beautiful image.
Yeah.
Like that would be the page where it'd be like, I hope like he gave that page to John Lewis because it's just like stunning.
It's the crafting of the pages is interesting to me because when I think about autobiographical comics, this is not what I would expect to find. So it is interesting to me that this is the medium that was chosen to tell this story versus John Lewis writing a prose book or being like a consulting producer on something. Like he was not involved in the Selma movie. And it's interesting to me that he chose a comic book, and because they because they drew it without color, the metaphor is driven home even stronger in those, like, them singing, like, that's such a soft emotional moment, but it rings so heavy in the story.
Yes. And so basically the story ends with the mayor integrating the counters.
Yeah.
All across Nashville. And that
kind of goes, I mean, I guess it'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's kind of...
And they catch him on camera. This is like, that's sort of I posted it to my Instagram, so now you have to do, they're calling him out because he said it on camera.
Yes, and we get that as John Lewis walks. He's walking to the courtyard to go see the inauguration.
Oh, I love the juxtaposition in the modern day timeline of they're so worried because it is freezing, and John Lewis's white aide is like, oh, just take my scarf. Without thinking, because he's an older gentleman who's going to be outside in the winter. He needs to be kept warm.
And it's very cold in Washington, D.C. in January.
But the contrast of that...
It's killed one of our presidents, actually.
Yes. Versus, the white people who, won't let him sit at the lunch counter. I don't know if this aide is based on a real person or not. He probably is. But,
I would say so.
But narratively, it's a very nice piece of writing.
And that is basically... the plot details of March Book 1.
There's definitely well, now you have to read Volume 2.
Well, I
think it was always planned as a trilogy.
Do you want to park out our Book 2 plans right now, or you want to hold on them?
We'll hold on them.
Okay. Now, Ashley, I know you have some discussion points ready.
I do.
And I know we have some questions from the patrons, but let's go through some discussion questions first and see what we got.
I want to shout out the University of Michigan because they have a full 20-plus page reading guide available for March Book 1. They have them for all of the books.
Nice.
And these are publicly available. I can share the links and people can check them out. It's a really nice companion to reading March because, yes, you can go in depth on all forms of art. And I think we strive to have interesting conversations, but I just think this is for March in particular because it has so much to say. I really appreciate that they made this publicly available. So yeah.
Are we going to go through the study guide and kind of answer the questions?
Yeah. Well, they have a bunch of different segments on them, and there's hundreds of questions. So I think we will just, I'll probably just pick one from every section that we could chat about. This one's really interesting. The first segment that it gives you is legal, and it asks, what role did lawyers and the law play in this narrative? And I think that's really interesting because to me, the idea of lawyers and the law are in contrast because John Lewis and his group of activists have lawyers on their side to fight the law. And I thought that was kind of neat. And then in the historical section, they asked what events outside of Lewis's immediate experience shaped and influenced his choices. And I think that speaks back to what you're talking about Brown versus Board of Education. That this book touches on a lot of really important civil rights moments, even if he was not directly involved. And Hamilton is very trendy right now. Jason and I watched it. We've been chatting about it a lot. And you said to me once that it's so crazy that these 39 dudes were all in the same spot at the same time to make America happen.
Well, in all of the space-time continuum.
The world, yeah.
That these 40 guys, these strong personalities all happen to just be in the same 300 miles of Earth, And I
kind of think it's the same thing to be said about these civil rights leaders. We think of that core group of 6 of which John Lewis is a part of, but how interesting that they were all in this place of an age, intelligent enough to use what they had to push this forward.
One quick beat, Ashley.
Sure.
I want to point out that sound means that GHL intern Cat Brago has entered the room.
Oh, nice.
We might be at a better sound, but he's currently overseeing the podcast right beside Ashley right now.
Is he? Where is he?
He's right to your right.
Oh, he is. He's like a little donut.
It wouldn't be a book club unless the intern comes in. Hey, you want to check these levels? Nope. No, he doesn't. Jesus. Is he ever going to do everything?
All right. Under the arts and design section, I'd love for you to answer this for me, Jason.
Sure.
What design elements were most effective for you as a reader?
The shading, I thought, is the best. Again, you brought it up earlier. Gray tone, black and white comic books are really hard. Gray tone comic books are very hard. And what we mean by that is it's not exactly black and white, but it's where you use black and
As your primary color.
yes, but you use a lot of shadows and how bright they are, how dark they are to tell your stories and to shade your stories because you're not using color. And I think the artwork in this is astounding. Especially, I think the artwork does a really good job of stopping the story at certain points, like that one splash page that I liked, which is a profile of John Lewis, and really being like, "Hey, the story is changing now.
The pacing, yeah.
Stop. Something's changed." Like it does that quite a bit, and I think that really hammers down the emotionality and makes you realize, oh, that's a big deal.
I really think the lettering is quite good in this, which
I
is
agree.
also done by Nate Powell. And a design aspect that I really like is as their adversaries become more and more hysterical, whether that is out of fear or out of anger, the lettering gets like loopier and messier and harder to read.
Sure.
Because ultimately what they're saying is dumb and doesn't matter and it's hateful and
Yep.
it's destructive to the narrative. But the way they choose who to letter in what style, I think is very interesting. And it's really hard to find an artist who can also letter very well. So Nate Powell, hats off to you because those are two very different, complex skill set. Okay, I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
From their literary segment that says, what does the genre of graphic novel add or take away from autobiography and memoir?
Oh, interesting. You know what I think it adds?
Tell me.
I think it really adds a sense of you being in their shoes. And I think that really is something that's quite successful about March, is that you feel like you are beside John Lewis throughout this entire story, throughout this entire book. And I think that's something and it really puts you in the mindset of John Lewis, which you would not get from a book, because sometimes autobiographies are very dry.
Yeah.
I will say the disadvantage of this is that we're not getting to hear, because imagine if this was a novel, and John Lewis does have a memoir, by the way. If we don't hear his inner thoughts, which is something you generally do not see unless it's a thing with a lot of caption boxes in comic books. We don't hear his inner thoughts. We get to see his external thoughts, whereas in a book, we would probably hear what he thought about each of these events. But to be honest with you, I think, especially with the subject matter and the tone, that this was a better choice to take it to a graphic novel.
There you go. So shall we move into our rating, or should we do, we do rating before Patreon.
Yes, we do a
Let's
rating.
do our rating.
Because our rating, Ashley, I don't know if you know this.
Tell me, I might have forgotten.
Is 1 out of 5 Bragos.
We need to record him meowing into the microphone.
Good luck.
So every time we talk about him, we can just have him go meow.
Yeah. So 1 out of 5 Bragos, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. Ashley, what would you rate March Book 1? That is the official title, March Book 1. Right?
March Book 1, yeah. Okay. March Book 1, March Book 2, March Book 3. Very simple, very good for SEO, very Googleable.
I just didn't know, because sometimes what they do when they split things into 3 volumes is they give each one of them a weird subtitle. I just was like,
look, our second volume has a weird subtitle, so.
It's not a subtitle. It's the title.
That's fair.
There's no colon.
You're right. I've read a bunch of memoir and autobio comics in my time. I've read a bunch of them about revolutionaries and tough subject matters. I have been reading a lot about the Black American experience recently.
Yes.
In an effort to try and be a better human. I think this book is at the apex of so many different types of storytelling, and I think it does all of it very well. I think it's very beautiful. I think it's emotional. Like, it's hard not just to be like, give it 100 out of 5 Bragos. You know what I mean? But for the sake of respecting the scale in honor of Forrest McNeil, I will give it 5 out of 5 Bragos.
Nice.
Jason and Min, how many Bragos would you give March Book 1?
This is very easily. I was reading this book late at night, and I think I got 20 pages into it, and I stopped, and I was like, this is astounding. Like, this is so emotional, so real, so connective, and usually, again, autobiographical comics. I didn't say that word right. You know,
autobiographical,
what I mean. Thank you. They're kind of dry. They really are, and I don't feel this is dry at all. I think this is so emotionally connected and so compelling, and this is easily 5 out of 5 Bragos. Like, no doubt this is 5 out of 5 Bragos.
Yeah, I said this at the top. This is probably the best book we've read for book club.
I know, no doubt this is the best. No doubt this is the best one. 100%.
There's a reason it won everything. Absolutely deserved it. All right, so let's move on to our Patreon comments. I would like to take this moment to shame our patrons for only asking 2 questions.
What?
You asked more questions about Invincible than about March.
Well, hold on. Hailing frequencies are open to our Patreon.
Well, it's 2 questions from one person, so.
Oh, well.
Hailing frequencies are open to David A. Skelton.
David A. Skelton!
Who lives in the same county as us and we like very much.
Lovely patrons will know that if they go over to the Patreon at patreon.com/Jawiin, they know that sound for GHL Extra. That's the podcast that we make every single week as companions to this podcast. And this week, I think our companion episode is
it's going to be historical figures who would make the subjects of a great graphic novel. It'll be a better title than
what
that.
Other real life figures that make great graphic novels, which would be a very interesting discussion. So come over to patreon.com/Jawiin and listen to that. You can only hear that on Patreon. But David Skelton, hailing frequencies are open. Let's hear what he has to say.
All right, so David's first question is for you.
Oh, boy.
Jason, you grew up on a farm.
Yes, I did.
What did you think of his chicken story at the beginning? My partner grew up on a farm as well, and will never forget the day her pet cow, Joe Bob, wasn't there anymore.
Joe Bob.
I know you have stories about naming the cows and upsetting your sister.
Yes, I do. I do. Well, we had lots of cows, and I just very early on, like, because we had a local butcher.
Yeah.
Or we had a local butcher. We had a neighbor farmer
who also
was a butcher. Yeah, and he kind of had like a low rent butcher business that he would do. So you would
let's call it independent.
Yes, you would take. Yes, that's fair. You would take your cow or your pig or your sheep over to him, and he would butcher it for you. And I very early, got exposed to that. And so I would do a thing when we walked through the cows where, my younger sister would name the cows, and I'd be like, oh, I have names for them too. And she'd be like, what is that? And I'd be like, that's Quarter Pounder. That's Big Mac. That's the Whopper. That's
such a little troll.
That's the Baconator with cheese, even though that didn't existed yet. But no, I loved the chicken story. As I said earlier, I thought it was really great. I thought it was really realistic. We didn't have that many chickens. My grandmother had chickens, and I would go out and feed them every time. But I will tell you this, and I bet you most people will know this. Chickens are mean.
Yeah.
They're real mean, dude. They will peck you, and the roosters are no joke. I remember I got chased by a rooster as a little kid once.
So you didn't love chickens the way John Lewis did?
No, I didn't. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to say that maybe I didn't have the sweet, sultry voice that John Lewis did, because obviously,
it's true.
Maybe the secret is I didn't preach to them.
There you go.
I should have preached to them.
The chickens love Jesus.
I guess I should have read. If I would have read something to them, they might have loved me, but I didn't, and so they chased me away.
All you did was feed them.
Yeah, all I did was give them life sustenance.
All right, David's second question says, powerful illustration at the end on how much a lot of the movement was youth driven. Mm-hmm. Do you think the same generational divide is evident today that John Lewis mentions at the end with Thurgood Marshall? I wonder what the MLK comic book that radicalized them to nonviolent resistance is still around. Take that, Seduction of the Innocent Dude. Okay, so there is a couple different things to unpack in this question. The first question is, do we think there is the same generational divide that John Lewis mentions between his generation and Thurgood Marshall's generation, which is sort of the older generation?
Without getting too political, yes.
We're absolutely not getting political. I think generational divides are inevitable even when you are on the same side, even when you are working toward the same goal, I'm not saying which one is right in any given situation, because there are times when either side is right, but of course there is. But one hopes that, as happened with civil rights, that ultimately, if everyone is working toward the same goal, progress will be achieved.
The comic book, by the way, he was talking about is the Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story, which was published by FOR, which explained the basics of passive resistance and nonviolent action as tools for desegregation. That's a lot of what we talked about when he meets Jim Lawson. That's the document that Jim Lawson uses.
Yes. By the way, you can find it on Comixology.
That's amazing.
I guess I'll add it to our recommended reading.
Yeah.
I do not think you can find it published. I don't think you can find a lot of those. You can find it on Amazon too, because Amazon owns Comixology. They sold it for 10 cents. I don't think you can find a physical copy of it. I think that's going to be much harder to get your hands on, but you can definitely still find that. I also think it's very funny that David says, take that, Seduction of the Innocent Dude, because nuts to that guy, he sucked. So of all historical comics, that's a pretty good one to go and check out.
Okay.
And those are all our Patreon questions.
Oh, well, thank you, guys.
Thank you, David. Single guy.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, David.
One person.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David, for reading March.
Yeah, really.
It was good, right?
It was so good.
All the rest of you guys missed out.
Yeah, you better read it. Shall we do the recommended reading?
Sure. Recommended reading is where, if you go over to geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading, we have a list of books, movies, DVDs that we recommend as companion materials to every episode we ever recorded. And we have little widgets where you can click on them and it'll take you to where you can purchase them and read them yourselves. Ashley.
Yes.
What is going to go on that list this week?
I mean, obviously, March Book 1.
Yep.
I'm also going to include the March Complete Trilogy slipcase. That's what Jason and I own. It's a really nice collection of the full thing. It's the most bang for your buck. So I'm definitely going to recommend that. I'm going to recommend Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement. That is John Lewis's prose memoir that Jason talked about during the lesson. And then I am also going to put, this is digital only, so Kindle Comixology only, Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story. It is $1.99. Get it. Read it at your leisure. And because it is so prominently featured here, I think it'll make a nice companion. I am also on this page and on our social media, I'm going to link to the reading guide that we reference. I'm going to link John Lewis's final essay that we mentioned at the top. And I'm also going to link to Barack Obama's eulogy of John Lewis, because it's very, very good. And in March Book 1, we've seen how the older generation is influencing John. And this video in particular is interesting to see how his work affected a younger generation of advocates. So that is all of our recommended reading. Lots of good stuff this week. Yeah. Jason, it's honor roll time.
Yes, the honor roll. I need a sound effect for the honor. I'm going to get sound effects for all of these now that we have the new Rode Podcaster Procaster here that we're using for all this stuff. I don't have a sound effect right now, so you're just going to have to deal with it. Actually, I'd love if the listeners wanted to tweet us at GHL Podcast on Twitter and tell us what they think the sound effect for the honor roll should be.
Or if you want to make it and send it to us, we'll credit you in every episode.
You know what? If you want to make it, and I will put this caveat on, I am a audio savant.
Audiophile?
Yes, thank you. I'm not good with words today. Anyways, if you give us a decently quality audio file for a sort of theme song for the honor roll, we'll play it.
Yeah.
We will play it in the episodes. I will happily do it. And you know what? I will open that gate for all of the sections of the GHL podcast. If you guys want to make us a jingle, we now have the ability to play these jingles in the show.
Okay, listeners, I need you. We're going to have Jason put his fingers in his ears right now. Only send jingles for the teaching tweet. Don't send them for anything else. Just the teaching tweet, Jason's favorite section of the podcast.
What?
This is your ASMR segment.
Huh? You saying something?
Remember, only for the teaching tweet.
So any section we would happily, but I will say less than a minute.
Oh yeah, 30 seconds ideally.
And you good audio quality. Good audio quality. You guys can Google that. It's very easy to find. So, but we'd happily. The honor roll, by the way, give us a jingle insert here. The honor roll is if you go over to Apple Podcasts and you leave this podcast a 5-star review, we are going to read your review live on the air here as a thank you, because leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts helps bump the podcast in the algorithms, helps us find more listeners, helps us discover and get into new categories, and we want to thank you for that. You can write anything you want, and we will read it on the air as long as you give us 5 stars. So, Ashley, who joins the honor roll today?
Today we are joined by Lenny Briscoe County Jr.
Hey!
Who says, now that's what I call podcasting. Pretty good.
I love it. The double reference. Do you get the first reference?
No.
Now that's what I call pod racing.
Oh, that's funny.
That's what, yeah. And
pretty, that's Larry David.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Curb Your Enthusiasm joke is what that is. That's great. I love it.
I'm going to call it right now Jason's all-time favorite review.
Well done.
And also joining the honor roll today is FJC509, who says, I'm learning a lot about 5 stars. I've loved comic book shows and movies with my whole life, but I've just started reading comics last year and I got hooked. This podcast is a huge help to learn about comic book characters that may pique my interest. Though I'm a DC guy, it's cool to learn about Marvel characters as well. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening.
So FJC509 and Lenny Briscoe County Jr., welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. Professor Jason, what is going on here today?
Well, over in the corner, Mr. Lewis is in the corner. He's stretching. And basically, he said that the next 10 people that walk into the Teacher's Lounge, which unfortunately is you two gentlemen, you're going to go on a 5-mile walk. So buckle up.
What does Mr. Lewis teach?
Mr. Lewis teaches narrative fiction.
Oh, well done. Very nice, very nice, very nice.
All right, so I think this is, are we doing a teaching tweet for this one?
No, we're not. We don't do teaching tweets for book clubs.
Okay, I just have deleted them all from my head. All right, anyways. But I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so don't forget to follow us on all the places of social media for Geek History Lesson. Ashley, what are those?
You can do that at geekhistorylesson.com, Facebook.com/Geek History Lesson, or on Twitter at GHL Podcast.
Yes, and I think we want to talk about...
Nope, that's for the stick around, so let's not talk about it.
Okay, cool. This is well planned.
One of us is looking at show notes.
Yes. Okay, so don't forget to, of course, follow and subscribe to us on all the places that you listen to podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. If we're not on a podcast service that you'd like us to be on, tell us about it. It's because we don't know about it. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Jawiin. That's Jawiin. Follow Ashley on Instagram and Twitter at Ashley V. Robinson. Please go pick up and pre-order Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio. And now, or to hashtag stick around, the actual final part of this podcast where we've been talking about something we've been alluding since I think minute 5 of this podcast that we can finally talk about here. Hashtag stick around. Ashley, what are we talking about? Because we want to make sure people stick through the plugs.
Yeah. So I was originally going to pitch to you when we were talking about doing 3 of them in a row.
No!
But we're not going to do that.
No.
So I think that we should continue and do Volume 2 and Volume 3 on the show.
I agree.
So what about if we do Volume 2 next year, the week of February 21st, because that is John Lewis's birthday.
I love that.
Yeah.
But if you guys want that as well, should we put out a poll for this?
Why don't we just do a Twitter hashtag?
Okay, so hashtag March Yes.
GHL March Yes?
Yes, hashtag GHL March Yes is going to be the hashtag of this. Guys, if you want us to do book 2 of March, we love book 1 of March. We'd love to continue this journey. And yeah, it'll be a great way to celebrate John Lewis's birthday, Representative John Lewis. It's great.
And maybe what I would love to do, and if people are interested in this, tack this into your tweets as well. Maybe we could get one of his collaborators to join us for a little interview segment.
Oh, interesting.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I think
they're great Instagram, great Twitter follows as well. So.
Yes, Nate Powell has an awesome,
beautiful Instagram.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see. But
cool.
I think we're definitely going to do more March
Yes.
here on the G. So I guess we're going to do at least 2 more book club episodes.
Sure. But not till 2021.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. This has been Geek History Lesson. I am Jason, sometimes loves chickens, Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the class?
Class is dismissed.